It was a quiet evening in the small town of Maplewood, where the streets were lined with trees and the air carried the faint smell of fresh-cut grass. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the roads. Lieutenant Maria Lopez drove her car along one of these empty streets, heading home after a long day at Fort Ridgeway, the nearby military base where she served as an officer in the U.S. Army. Maria enjoyed the calmness of this part of her commute. She liked how peaceful it felt compared to the controlled chaos of the base or the crowded highways that led into the city. Her mind wandered as she thought about what she'd cook for dinner later, maybe something simple like pasta or tacos, and whether her brother Alex would text her tonight. Life seemed good, predictable even. But all of that changed within seconds as, she approached a stop sign near the edge of town. Maria noticed a figure standing beside a police cruiser parked off to the side of the road. At first, she didn't think much of it. Officers often patrolled this area to monitor speeders. However, just as she slowed down and prepared to continue driving, flashing blue and red lights appeared behind her. Sighing softly, she pulled over, onto the shoulder, checking her rearview mirror to see what might have prompted the stop. Officer Kevin Doyle stepped out of his vehicle, adjusting his belt as he walked toward Maria's car. He wasn't particularly tall, but his bulky frame gave him an imposing presence. His face bore a scowl that seemed permanent, etched deep into his features by years of frustration and anger. To Kevin, every traffic stop was another opportunity to assert dominance over someone who dared break the rules, or at least that's how he saw it. Maria rolled down her window and greeted him politely. "Good evening, officer," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Is there a problem?" Kevin leaned down slightly so he could look inside the car. His eyes narrowed as they scanned Maria's uniform. The insignia on her jacket clearly marked her as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. For a moment he hesitated, then without missing a beat he pointed to the ground beside her car. "You dropped trash back there," he said gruffly. "That's littering." Maria blinked, surprised. "Trash?" She glanced at the spot he indicated and saw a crumpled soda can lying near the curb. It must have fallen out earlier when she'd briefly stopped to check her phone messages. She hadn't even realized it was there. "I'm sorry about that," she replied calmly. "I didn't mean to drop anything. I'll pick it up right now if you'd like." But Kevin didn't seem satisfied. Instead, his expression hardened, further. "Do you know who cleans up after people like you?" he snapped. "Taxpayers do, and we don't appreciate having our streets turned into garbage dumps." Maria frowned. Something about his tone made her uneasy. "People like me?" she asked cautiously. "What does that mean?" Kevin ignored her question and instead demanded her license and registration. Maria reached for her wallet, careful to move slowly so as not to alarm him. As she handed over the documents, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was escalating unnecessarily. Why was he acting so hostile over something as minor as a stray soda can? "Lieutenant Maria Lopez," Kevin read aloud from her ID, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Army, huh? You sure dress fancy for someone picking up cans." Maria clenched her jaw but kept her composure. "Sir, I assure you this was an accident. If you let me know what fine I need to pay, I'll take care of it immediately." Instead of responding, Kevin began pacing around her car, inspecting it closely. His behavior grew increasingly aggressive. "Funny thing is," he muttered loud, enough for her to hear, "you don't look like the type of person who usually drives cars like this. Most soldiers I've met drive beat-up trucks or old sedans, not shiny new SUVs." Maria felt a surge of irritation. Was he implying something? About her background? About her ethnicity? She decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "Are you suggesting I shouldn't own this car because I'm Latina?" she asked bluntly. Kevin froze for a split second before turning to face her, his face reddening. "Don't put words in my mouth," he growled. "I'm just doing my job here." "No, you're not," Maria shot back, her patience wearing thin. "You're harassing me over a piece of trash while making assumptions based on my race. That's not your job. That's discrimination." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them crackled like electricity in the cool evening air. Then, without warning, Kevin placed his hand on the grip of his holstered gun. "Careful, Lieutenant. he warned, his voice low and menacing. "You don't want to make any sudden moves." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Had he really just threatened her? Over a soda can? She forced herself to stay calm, knowing that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "Officer Doyle," she said evenly, "I am fully cooperating with you. There's no reason for this level of aggression." But Kevin wasn't listening anymore. His ego had taken over, fueled by years of unchecked authority and prejudice. Slowly, deliberately, he drew his weapon and pointed it at Maria through the open window. "Turn off the engine," he ordered. "Now." Time seemed to slow down as Maria processed what was happening. This wasn't just a bad day, it was a nightmare. Here she was, a decorated military officer, being held at gunpoint by a man who couldn't handle being questioned. Her training kicked in, reminding her to remain still and avoid provoking him further. But inside, fury burned hotter than ever. Unbeknownst to Kevin, Maria's dashboard camera had been recording everything since she'd been pulled over. Every word exchanged, every movement captured in crystal clear detail. Little did either of them know, this footage would soon become the spark that ignited a nationwide firestorm. As Kevin continued to bark commands, oblivious to the storm brewing, beyond their isolated roadside confrontation, Maria silently vowed to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation someday. Because this wasn't just about a single act of injustice. It was about exposing the rot beneath the surface of institutions meant to protect and serve. And so, what started as a routine traffic stop ended as anything but ordinary. A pivotal moment that would ripple through the lives of countless individuals and reshape the community forever. The next morning, Maria Lopez sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand. She stared blankly at the wall, replaying the events of the previous night over and over in her mind. The image of Officer Kevin Doyle pointing his gun at her was burned into her memory. It wasn't just fear that lingered, it was anger, frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. Betrayal by someone who was supposed to protect her, not threaten her. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. A text from her brother Alex lit up the screen. "Maria, are you okay? I heard about what happened. Call me." Below his message were several notifications from social media apps she hadn't checked yet. Curious, she opened one of them and froze. Someone had uploaded the dashcam footage online, and it was already going viral. The video showed everything. The littering accusation, Kevin's aggressive tone, and finally him drawing his weapon. Thousands of people had viewed it, and comments were flooding in faster than Maria could read them. Some supported her, calling her brave for standing up to an abusive officer. Others attacked her, accusing her of exaggerating or provoking the situation. Her stomach churned as she scrolled through the hateful messages, many of which mocked her race and questioned her right to wear a military uniform. By midday, local news stations had picked up the story. Reporters camped outside her modest home, hoping to catch a glimpse of her leaving or returning. Maria tried to ignore them, but their presence made it impossible to feel safe in her own space. She called Rachel Bennett, a civil rights attorney recommended by a colleague at the base. Rachel listened patiently as Maria recounted the details of the traffic stop, then assured her they would take legal action against Kevin and the police department. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Kevin Doyle woke up to a very different kind of storm. His phone was buzzing nonstop with calls and texts from fellow officers, friends, and even strangers. At first, he dismissed the messages, assuming they were congratulating him for handling the situation properly. But when he turned on the TV and saw the headlines, his blood ran cold. "Racist cop points gun at military officer over littering," one news anchor announced. Another station referred to him as the poster child for police misconduct. Kevin slammed the remote down in disgust. How dare they twist the truth? He had been following protocol, hadn't he? If anything, Lieutenant Lopez had disrespected his authority and deserved to be taught a lesson. At the police precinct, Chief Robert Hayes faced mounting pressure to address the scandal. Reporters swarmed the building, demanding answers about Kevin's behavior and the department's track record. Inside, tempers flared among the staff. Some defended Kevin, arguing that the public didn't understand the pressures of law enforcement. Others whispered behind closed doors, admitting they weren't surprised by the allegations. Everyone knew Kevin had a reputation for being difficult, especially with minority civilians. Chief Hayes decided to hold a press conference to control the narrative. Standing before a sea of microphones, he spoke carefully, choosing his words, to avoid incriminating himself or the department. Officer Doyle has been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, he stated. We take these matters seriously and are committed to ensuring justice is served. But his attempts at damage control only fueled more outrage. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace, and fire racist cops." Among them was Jack Thompson, a retired Navy veteran who lived 2 blocks away from Maria. Jack had seen the dash cam footage earlier that day and felt compelled to act. He organized a community rally to demand accountability, inviting neighbors, friends, and anyone else willing to stand up against injustice. As the protest grew louder, so did the voices of those seeking reform. Emily Dawson, a young journalist working for the local newspaper, saw an opportunity to make a name for herself. She began digging deeper into Kevin's history, poring over old records and interviewing former colleagues and victims of his alleged misconduct. What she uncovered shocked even her. Kevin had been involved in multiple incidents over the years, including accusations of racial profiling, excessive force, and verbal abuse. In each case, complaints were either dismissed or swept under the rug due to lack of evidence, or so it seemed. Emily discovered patterns suggesting systemic bias within the department, with higher-ups turning a blind eye to problematic behavior as long as officers like Kevin followed orders. Her findings culminated in a scathing article published the following week. The headline read, "A Pattern of Abuse: How One Officer's Actions Reflect Broader Issues in Law Enforcement." The piece went viral overnight, drawing national attention to Maplewood. People across the country shared the story, expressing solidarity with Maria while condemning Kevin and the system that allowed such behavior to persist. Despite the growing backlash, Kevin remained defiant. He gave an exclusive interview to a conservative talk show host, insisting he was the real victim in all of this. "I was just doing my job," he declared, leaning forward earnestly. "You can't blame me for enforcing the law. If anything, Lieutenant Lopez should be thanking me for teaching her a valuable lesson about respecting authority." His comments sparked heated debates on social media, dividing audiences along ideological lines. Supporters praised him as a misunderstood hero standing up to political correctness. Critics ridiculed him as a symbol of unchecked racism and corruption. Meanwhile, Maria found herself at the center of it all, grappling with the weight of newfound fame and infamy. She struggled to focus on her work at the base, where whispers followed her wherever she went. Some soldiers approached her to offer support, sharing their own stories of discrimination. Others avoided her altogether, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. Even her family worried about her safety, urging her to lay low until things settled down. But Maria couldn't stay silent. Every time she thought about backing off, she remembered the look in Kevin's eyes when he pointed his gun at her. That moment wasn't just about her. It represented countless others who had endured similar treatment without a platform to fight back. She realized she had a responsibility to speak out, not only for herself, but for everyone affected by systemic injustice. With Rachel's guidance, Maria filed a formal complaint against Kevin and the police department, alleging racial profiling, misconduct, and violation of her civil rights. The legal process promised to be long and grueling, but Maria refused to give up. She attended meetings with activists, gave interviews to journalists, and joined protests alongside Jack and other community members. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Maria returned home to find Alex waiting for her on the porch. He stood up as she approached, concern etched on his face. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Maria sighed, collapsing onto the steps beside him. "Honestly, I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm making a difference. Other days it feels like nothing will ever change. Alex placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, sis, and you're not alone in this. We've got your back no matter what. Maria nodded, grateful for his support. As they sat together under the stars, she allowed herself a brief moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could lead to something better, not just for her, but for everyone fighting for fairness and equality. Unbeknownst to her, the battle was far from over. The fallout from that fateful traffic stop had only scratched the surface of deeper issues lurking beneath the town's quiet facade. And as tensions continued to rise, the entire community braced itself for the inevitable reckoning that lay ahead. The days following Maria Lopez's decision to file a formal complaint against Officer Kevin Doyle were filled with both challenges and unexpected support. The small town of Maplewood, once known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors, now buzzed with activity as the community took sides in the growing controversy. While some residents defended Kevin, claiming he was simply doing his job, others rallied behind Maria, determined to expose the truth and demand justice. Maria found herself at the center of it all, navigating a whirlwind of emotions. Some mornings she woke up feeling hopeful, energized by the people standing beside her. Other times she felt overwhelmed, unsure if she had the strength to keep fighting. But every time doubt crept in, someone new stepped forward to offer their help, reminding her that she wasn't alone. One of those allies was Jack Thompson, the retired Navy veteran who had organized the first community rally. Jack was in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense attitude. He had lived in Maplewood for over 20 years and prided himself on being a voice for fairness and equality. When he saw the dashcam footage of Kevin pointing his gun at Maria, he knew he couldn't stay silent. Jack reached out to Maria personally, inviting her to speak at another rally he was planning. "We need to keep the pressure on," he told her firmly. "If we let this slide, nothing will change. You're not just standing up for yourself, you're standing up for everyone." Maria agreed to participate, though she admitted she felt nervous about speaking publicly. "I'm used to leading soldiers, not crowds," she joked weakly. But Jack reassured her, saying, "Just be yourself. People will listen because your story is real." On the day of the rally, hundreds of people gathered in the town square holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice for Maria" and "End police brutality." Maria stood on a makeshift stage, her heart pounding as she looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment she hesitated, unsure where to begin. Then she took a deep breath and started talking. "I never expected something like this to happen to me," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But it did. And when I watched that video, I realized how lucky I was to have evidence, to have people willing to stand with me. So many others don't get that chance. They face racism, discrimination, and abuse without anyone noticing or caring. That's why I'm here today. Not just for myself, but for them." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, earning cheers and applause. Afterward, strangers approached her to shake her hand or share their own experiences of injustice. Maria listened intently, realizing how widespread the problem truly was. It wasn't just about Kevin Doyle. It was about a system that allowed people like him to act without consequences. Another key ally emerged in the form of Emily Dawson, the young journalist whose article had exposed Kevin's troubling history. Emily was only 24, fresh out of college and eager to prove herself in the competitive world of reporting. She had grown up in Maplewood and always dreamed of making a difference in her hometown. Now, covering Maria's case gave her the opportunity to do just that. Emily spent countless hours researching, interviewing, and writing follow-up stories that kept the issue in the public eye. Her articles highlighted not only Kevin's misconduct but also the broader patterns of inequality within the police department. She interviewed former victims of racial profiling, whistleblowers within the force, and experts on law enforcement reform. Each piece added fuel to the fire, keeping the pressure on Chief Robert Hayes and his team. One evening, after publishing yet another exposé, Emily received an email from Lieutenant James Carter, a senior officer at Fort Ridgeway. He praised her work and offered to connect her with other military personnel who had faced similar treatment from local law enforcement. "Your reporting is shining a light on something we've been dealing with for years," he wrote. "Thank you for giving us a voice." Encouraged by the response, Emily threw herself even deeper into her investigation. She became a familiar face at protests and rallies, often seen scribbling notes or snapping photos. Though some accused her of bias, she remained committed to uncovering the truth. "This isn't about politics," she told a colleague during a heated debate at the newsroom. "It's about holding people accountable." Meanwhile, Rachel Bennett, Maria's attorney, worked tirelessly behind the scenes to build a strong legal case. Rachel was known for her sharp mind and unwavering dedication to civil rights. She had handled numerous high-profile cases before, but Maria's situation struck a personal chord. As a woman of color, Rachel understood the frustration and fear that came with facing systemic bias. Rachel assembled a team of experts, including forensic analysts, legal scholars, and community advocates, to ensure they left no stone unturned. She also reached out to national organizations focused on police accountability, seeking their support and resources. Together, they crafted a strategy designed to hold both Kevin and the police department accountable, not just for what happened to Maria, but for the larger issues at play. Back at the precinct, Chief Robert Hayes felt the walls closing in. The mounting public scrutiny, combined with Emily's relentless reporting, left him scrambling to defend his department. He called emergency meetings with his staff, urging them to present a united front. "We can't afford any more leaks or slip-ups," he warned. "Stick to the script." But cracks began to show among the officers. Some quietly expressed regret over how the situation was handled, while others grew defensive, accusing outsiders of misunderstanding the realities of policing. Morale plummeted as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Kevin, meanwhile, retreated further into denial. Surrounded by supporters who validated his perspective, he convinced himself that the backlash was part of a larger conspiracy against law enforcement. He refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, doubling down on his claim that Maria had provoked him. Despite the chaos swirling around her, Maria drew strength from the growing network of allies. She met regularly with Jack to plan future protests, strategized with Rachel to prepare for court, and collaborated with Emily to amplify her message. Slowly but surely, she began to see the impact of their collective efforts. Local businesses started displaying signs supporting Maria, while schools hosted discussions about racial bias and police reform. Even some members of the police department reached out privately to express solidarity. Though they feared retaliation if they spoke publicly, the movement gained momentum, spreading beyond Maplewood to neighboring towns and cities. One particularly meaningful moment came when Maria received a letter from a young girl named Lily, whose mother had read about her story online. "Dear Lieutenant Lopez," Lily wrote in neat handwriting, "I think you are very brave. My mom says you're helping make the world better for kids like me. Thank you." Maria held the letter close to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, she realized the true power of standing up for what was right. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle or exposing corruption. It was about inspiring others to believe in the possibility of change. As the weeks turned into months, the fight against injustice continued to grow. Allies from all walks of life joined forces, united by a shared vision of fairness and accountability. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they were building something bigger than themselves, a movement that would leave a lasting mark on Maplewood and beyond. And through it all, Maria carried one thought in her mind: this is just the beginning. The trial against Officer Kevin Doyle finally began on a chilly Monday morning in late October. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and supporters of both sides. Cameras lined the back wall, capturing every moment for news outlets across the country. Outside, protesters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice Now" and "Accountability Matters." For many, this case wasn't just about one officer. It represented a much larger fight against systemic Racism and police misconduct. Maria Lopez sat at the plaintiff's table alongside her attorney, Rachel Bennett. She wore her Army uniform, a deliberate choice to remind everyone of her service and the respect she deserved as an officer. Her face remained calm, but inside, her nerves were frayed. She knew the stakes were high. This trial could either validate her experience or dismiss it entirely. Either way, it would shape how people viewed issues of race and authority moving forward. On the other side of the room, Kevin Doyle sat stiffly next to his defense attorney, a well-known lawyer named Paul Carter. Kevin looked pale and uncomfortable, his usual bravado replaced by quiet defiance. He avoided making eye contact with Maria, instead staring straight ahead as if trying to block out the weight of the situation. His supporters filled several rows behind him, whispering encouragement and nodding approvingly whenever he glanced their way. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Monroe, called the court to order. After brief introductions, Rachel stood up to deliver her opening statement. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and steady. "This case is not just about littering or a traffic stop gone wrong. It's about accountability. It's about whether we allow individuals in positions of power to abuse that authority, based on prejudice and bias." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Lieutenant Maria Lopez, a decorated military officer, was targeted because of her race. She was threatened with violence over something as minor as a soda can. This behavior cannot be tolerated, not in our communities, not in law enforcement, and certainly not in America. When Rachel finished, Paul rose to present the defense's side. He spoke confidently, painting Kevin as a misunderstood figure doing his best under difficult circumstances. "Officer Doyle followed protocol," Paul insisted. "He encountered a situation where he felt unsafe and responded accordingly." Lieutenant Lopez escalated the confrontation by questioning his authority and accusing him of racial profiling. That's why tensions rose. His argument drew murmurs from the crowd, some supportive and others skeptical. When he sat down, Judge Monroe reminded everyone to remain respectful and focused. Then the prosecution called its first witness, Maria herself. Maria stepped onto the stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Rachel guided her through the events of the night in question, asking simple questions that allowed Maria to recount her version of the story without interruption. As she described how Kevin had drawn his gun and pointed it at her, her voice wavered slightly, but she maintained her composure. Under cross-examination, Paul tried to poke holes in her testimony. "Isn't it true, Lieutenant Lopez, that you became confrontational when Officer Doyle asked for your license and registration?" he asked sharply. "No," Maria replied firmly. "I cooperated fully. I only questioned his tone because it seemed unnecessarily aggressive." Paul pressed further, attempting to portray her as someone who couldn't handle being challenged. But Maria remained steadfast, answering each question with clarity and confidence. By the time she left the stand, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she had handled herself with dignity throughout the ordeal. Over the next few days, more witnesses took the stand. Emily Dawson testified about her investigation into Kevin's history, presenting documents and recordings that revealed a pattern of misconduct. Former victims of Kevin's actions also spoke, sharing painful stories of harassment and intimidation. One man, a local shopkeeper named Carlos Rivera, recounted how Kevin had once searched his store without cause, claiming he suspected illegal activity. "He treated me like a criminal because of my skin color," Carlos said, his voice trembling with emotion. "That's not justice, that's cruelty." The prosecution also called expert witnesses, including law enforcement trainers and civil rights advocates, to explain why Kevin's actions violated standard protocols. They emphasized that drawing a weapon during a routine traffic stop was excessive and unnecessary, especially given the lack of any real threat. For the defense, Paul relied heavily on character witnesses, fellow officers and acquaintances who praised Kevin as a dedicated public servant. However, their testimonies often came across as rehearsed and insincere, failing to counter the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. Throughout the trial, media coverage intensified. Emily's articles provided daily updates, analyzing key moments and reactions from both sides. Her reporting highlighted inconsistencies in Kevin's defense while amplifying the voices of those advocating for reform. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "We Stand with Maria" and "Police Accountability," keeping the national spotlight firmly on Maplewood. Outside the courthouse, protests continued, growing larger and more organized with each passing day. Jack Thompson played a crucial role in coordinating these efforts, ensuring they remained peaceful and impactful. He worked closely with Maria and other activists to keep the momentum going, knowing that public pressure could influence the outcome of the trial. The weeks dragged on. The emotional toll became evident. Maria struggled to balance her responsibilities at Fort Ridgeway with the demands of the trial. Her brother Alex visited frequently, offering comfort and encouragement. "You're doing amazing, sis," he told her one evening after a particularly grueling day. "Don't let them wear you down." Rachel echoed this sentiment, reminding Maria that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. "Every step of this process matters," she said. "Not just for you, but for everyone watching." Kevin, too, showed signs of strain. Once confident and combative, he now appeared withdrawn and defeated. His supporters grew quieter, sensing the tide turning against him. Even Chief Robert Hayes distanced himself publicly, issuing a vague statement about the importance of transparency and fairness in law enforcement. By the time closing arguments arrived, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Rachel delivered a powerful summary, urging the jury to consider the broader implications of their decision. "This isn't just about one incident," she said passionately. "It's about sending a message that discrimination and abuse of power will not be tolerated. Justice must prevail, for Maria, for Maplewood, and for all of us." Paul countered with a final plea for leniency, arguing that Kevin had simply made a mistake. But his words lacked conviction, overshadowed by the mountain of evidence stacked against his client. Finally, the jury retired to deliberate. For Maria and everyone involved, the wait felt endless. Hours stretched into days as the jurors reviewed the facts, debated the evidence, and weighed the arguments. Outside, the community held its breath, hoping for a verdict that would reflect the truth. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Monroe instructed everyone to remain calm as the foreperson handed over the sealed envelope containing their decision. As she read aloud the guilty verdict on charges of misconduct, unlawful use of a firearm, and violating civil rights, gasps rippled through the room. Maria exhaled deeply, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of relief. Justice had been served, at least partially. But she knew the work wasn't over yet. True change required more than convictions. It demanded systemic reform and a commitment to equality. As the crowd erupted in cheers outside the courthouse, Maria joined Jack, Emily, and Rachel, linking arms with her allies. Together, they celebrated not just a victory in court, but the beginning of a movement that would continue to push for fairness and accountability, long after the headlines faded. The guilty verdict against Officer Kevin Doyle sent shockwaves through Maplewood and beyond. For weeks, the town had been divided, with tensions running high between those who supported Maria Lopez and those who defended Kevin. Now, as news of the jury's decision spread, the community erupted in a mix of celebration, disbelief, and anger. Maria stood outside the courthouse alongside her allies, Jack Thompson, Emily Dawson, Rachel Bennett, and others who had fought tirelessly for justice. The crowd around them chanted, "Justice prevails," while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this victory wasn't just about one man being held accountable. It was about exposing a broken system. Kevin, on the other hand, looked stunned as he was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His face was pale, his usual arrogance replaced by a defeated slump in his shoulders. As he disappeared into the backseat of a police car, some of his supporters protested loudly, calling the verdict unfair and accusing the court of bias. Others quietly slipped away, realizing the tide had turned against him. Back at the precinct, Chief Robert Hayes called an emergency meeting with his staff. The guilty verdict had cast a long shadow over the department, raising questions about leadership and accountability. Officers shuffled into the room, their faces grim. Some avoided eye contact, knowing they'd enabled or ignored Kevin's behavior in the past. Others whispered anxiously, wondering if similar scrutiny would fall on them next. "We've got a serious problem," Hayes began, pacing back and forth. "This case has put us under a microscope, and we need to act fast. I'm ordering mandatory training sessions on racial sensitivity and proper use of force starting next week. No excuses, no exceptions." His announcement was met with mixed reactions. A few officers nodded in agreement, acknowledging the need for change. But many bristled at what they saw as unnecessary criticism. One veteran officer named Mark muttered, under his breath, "We're damned if we do and damned if we don't." Outside the station, protesters gathered once again, holding signs that read, "Fire corrupt cops," and "Reform now." They demanded more than just Kevin's conviction. They wanted systemic changes to ensure something like this could never happen again. Jack Thompson addressed the crowd, his voice booming with determination. "Today we celebrate a step forward," he said. "But tomorrow we keep pushing for real reform. Accountability starts here." Emily Dawson continued reporting on the fallout, publishing articles that highlighted both the progress made and the challenges ahead. She interviewed residents, activists, and even former police officers willing to speak out about the culture within law enforcement. Her work kept the issue in the public eye, ensuring that the momentum didn't fade after the trial ended. For Maria, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. She returned to her duties at Fort Ridgeway, though she still felt the weight of everything she'd endured. Soldiers approached her frequently, thanking her for standing up and sharing their own stories of discrimination. Each conversation reinforced her belief that the fight was far from over. Her brother Alex visited often, bringing laughter and lightness to her days. "You've done something incredible, sis," he told her one evening as they sat together on her porch. "But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Rachel Bennett expanded her practice, focusing on cases involving police misconduct and civil rights violations. The trial had reignited her passion for advocacy, and she vowed to help others navigate similar battles. She stayed in touch with Maria, offering guidance and support whenever needed. As for Kevin, he served his sentence quietly, largely forgotten by the public. Sentenced to 2 years in prison, he spent most of his time avoiding interaction with fellow inmates and reflecting bitterly on what he saw as a betrayal by the system. To him, the trial hadn't been about justice. It had been about politics and media sensationalism. He refused to admit fault, convinced that he was simply doing his job. Meanwhile, Chief Hayes resigned under mounting pressure, replaced by a progressive leader named Linda Carter. Known for her commitment to transparency and reform, Linda implemented sweeping changes within the department. She introduced stricter oversight measures, encouraged open dialogue between officers and the community, and prioritized hiring practices aimed at increasing diversity. Despite these efforts, not everyone was satisfied with the outcome. Some critics argued that Kevin's punishment was too lenient given the severity of his actions. Others pointed out that true justice required addressing deeper issues within law enforcement, such as implicit bias and institutional racism. Protests continued sporadically, keeping the pressure on local officials to follow through on promises of reform. Maria used her platform to advocate for lasting change. She partnered with organizations like Leaders United for Equality, LUE, to push for policy reforms at the state and national levels. Together, they lobbied for legislation requiring body cameras for all officers, independent investigations of police misconduct, and increased funding for community programs aimed at bridging divides between law enforcement and civilians. Her efforts inspired similar movements across the country. In cities large and small, people rallied around calls for accountability and equality. Social media campaigns amplified voices that might otherwise have gone unheard, creating a network of support for those fighting injustice. Even politicians, took notice, introducing bills designed to address systemic issues within policing. One evening, as Maria drove home from a community meeting, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful traffic stop. It had been a painful journey, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but it had also been empowering, a reminder that courage and resilience could spark meaningful conversations and drive positive change. She pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment, staring at the house she now felt safe in again. The protests outside were quieter now, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Neighbors waved as they passed by, some stopping to thank her for her bravery. Children played in the streets without worry, their laughter echoing through the air. Maria smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of hope for the future. Justice hadn't come easily, and there was still so much work to be done. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that things could get better, not just for her, but for everyone affected by inequality and injustice. She stepped out of her car and headed inside. She thought about all the people who had stood by her side throughout the ordeal. Jack, Emily, Rachel, Alex. They had become more than allies. They were family. Together, they had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, unity and determination could lead to progress. And though the scars of the past would always remain, Maria knew she had emerged stronger. She had faced hatred and fear head-on, refusing to back down. In doing so, she had not only reclaimed her dignity but also ignited a movement that promised to reshape the world around her. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and challenging, but as Maria closed her front door, behind her she felt ready to face whatever came next. After all, she wasn't alone anymore. Months passed after the trial, and life in Maplewood began to settle into a new rhythm. The headlines that once dominated newspapers and TV screens slowly faded, replaced by other stories vying for attention. But for those who had lived through the ordeal, the protests, the courtroom drama, the verdict, the impact lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Kevin Doyle served his 2-year sentence quietly, spending most of his time alone in a small cell. His resentment grew with each passing day, convinced he was the victim of a biased system. He wrote letters to friends and family, ranting about how unfairly he'd been treated. Yet over time, even his staunchest supporters grew weary of his complaints. When he was finally released, Kevin found himself ostracized by the community he had sworn to protect. He moved away from Maplewood, disappearing from public view entirely. At the police precinct, things looked different under Chief Linda Carter's leadership. She had implemented sweeping reforms, including mandatory training on racial sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and proper use of force. Officers were required to wear body cameras at all times, and an independent review board was established to investigate complaints against law enforcement. While some officers grumbled about the changes, many welcomed them as steps toward rebuilding trust with the community. Jack Thompson continued his activism, organizing workshops and rallies aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. He partnered with schools, churches, and local businesses to create programs that promoted understanding and cooperation. Though he sometimes faced resistance, Jack remained optimistic. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he often said, "but every little bit helps." Emily Dawson's career flourished thanks to her groundbreaking reporting on the case. Her articles earned her recognition beyond Maplewood, leading to opportunities at larger news outlets. Yet she stayed connected to the town, determined to cover ongoing efforts toward reform. She became a trusted voice for accountability, using her platform to highlight stories of injustice and resilience alike. Rachel Bennett expanded her legal practice, taking on more cases involving civil rights, violations, and police misconduct. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and advocating for policy changes at both state and federal levels. Her work inspired others to pursue similar paths, creating a network of attorneys committed to fighting systemic inequality. For Maria Lopez, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though it was forever altered by her experience. She resumed her duties at Fort Ridgeway, earning promotions and accolades for her leadership skills. Soldiers looked up to her not only as a capable officer but also as someone who stood firm in the face of adversity. Whenever she spoke at events or addressed recruits, Maria emphasized the importance of integrity, respect, and standing up for what is right, even when it's hard. Her brother Alex remained her rock, visiting often and reminding her to take breaks when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. Together, they spent weekends hiking or cooking meals, finding joy in simple pleasures. Alex occasionally teased her about becoming a public figure, saying, "You're like a superhero now, sis. Just don't let it go to your head." Maria laughed at his jokes but knew deep down that she carried a responsibility to keep pushing for change, no matter how daunting the task seemed. She joined national advocacy groups, collaborating with activists, lawmakers, and community leaders to address broader issues of racial bias and inequality. Her story resonated with countless people, giving hope to those who felt powerless against injustice. One evening, Maria stood atop a hill overlooking Fort Ridgeway, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The base stretched out before her, alive with activity despite the fading light. Soldiers jogged along trails, trucks rumbled down roads, and flags fluttered gently in the breeze. It was a scene she had witnessed countless times before, yet it felt different now, charged with meaning. She thought about everything she had endured, the fear of being held at gunpoint, the frustration of facing hostility simply because of her race, the exhaustion of fighting a battle that sometimes felt unwinnable. Each emotion replayed in her mind like scenes from a movie, vivid and raw. But so too did the moments of triumph, the rallies, the verdict, the connections forged with allies who believed in justice as deeply as she did. Maria realized that while the scars of the past would never fully heal, they had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. And she had discovered the power of unity, seeing firsthand how collective voices could challenge even the most entrenched systems of oppression. As darkness fell, Maria turned and headed back to her car. On the drive home, she reflected on the future, not just for herself, but for everyone touched by the movement she had helped ignite. There was still much work to be done, of course. Laws needed to be rewritten, attitudes needed to shift, and institutions needed to evolve. But progress, however slow, was happening. People were waking up, speaking out, and demanding better. When she arrived home, Maria poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, gazing at the stars. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, full of obstacles and setbacks, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. In the months and years to come, Maria vowed to keep fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved fairness, dignity, and justice. She understood that true equality wouldn't come easily, but she also believed it was worth every ounce of effort, because in standing up for what was right, she had found her purpose, and in doing so, she had sparked a flame that refused to be extinguished. And as she sipped her tea, listening to the distant hum of crickets outside, Maria smiled faintly. The journey wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. After all, she had already proven that one person's courage could inspire thousands, and maybe, just maybe, it could change the world.